Well, of course I do. Budget Committee will now be called to order. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Skinner.
I'm here.
Burrell. Here. Bloom. Here. Campos. Chavez. Jethro. Here. Dababney.
Here.
Daly.
Here.
Dickinson.
Here.
Gordon. Grove. Harkey. Jones Sawyer.
Present.
Lowe. Mansour. Melendez. Burrell. Mullen. Marisucci.
Here.
Nazarian. Mustandy.
Here.
Patterson.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
Stone. King. Wagner.
Good groovy.
Weber.
Okay, good. Okay, good. I like that.
We have a quorum.
Is that all? Is that the only? Is that the only? Right. Yeah, for sure. Just meet each other. All right, good morning. I want to welcome a couple of our new members. Assemblymember Dababney. Did I get that right? Oh, thank you. Assemblymember Rodriguez and Assemblymember Weber. And I'm correct in that being our only new members. Is that right? Did I miss anyone new? Okay. You know, other than me. Thank you. Thank you. Today, we, the Budget Committee, begins our discussion of the Governor's 2014-15 budget. And after years of difficult decisions, and actually, let me see. I am looking at the wrong notes. Apologies. I got them right now. Anyway, for those of us who were members pre-2012, even really should we say, right, it's a great relief to see the budget that's before us. And I was elected in the fall of 2008 when banks, the stock market, the housing market, everything was collapsing around us. And I lived through, as many of my colleagues here, California's revenue freefall. And our continual ask, and some people may not have even perceived it as an ask, because with our constitutional obligation to balance a budget, we really weren't able to be very polite and ask. We had to cut, and people had to sacrifice for us to balance that budget. So now, when revenues are healthy, there's a natural and expected desire to protect ourselves from repeating that experience. For me, the challenge before us is to weigh the best paths forward that would provide some insurance against future downturns, because we know it's the cyclical cycle. There will be, hopefully never like we just experienced, but there will be, as well as some investment that helps sustain a healthier economic future. There's more than one path to minimizing downturns' harmful impacts. So thinking about that task, I'm one of these people that always thinks about personal experiences. And I'm also someone who, some of you may be surprised, but I'm very personally frugal. Up until very recently, the only debt I carried for most of my adult life was my mortgage. No other debt. And I did that because I went through very difficult times where I could hardly make ends meet for my daughter and I. And of course, it made me risk adverse. I was facing the decision to purchase a car. And a financial advisor told me I wanted to use just straight cash because I had it. I also I put in the max for my retirement every month, my paycheck. And I wanted to use the cash to buy the car. And the financial advisor said, "You're crazy. You're being penny wise and pound foolish, because with the interest rates right now, you could use," he asked me some questions about, status of my roof, things like that. He goes, "Don't use that cash for that car. Take this loan, then use the funds to make these repairs in your house, which if you don't do now are going to cost you a lot more later." And he told me some other things I should do. Well, I ended up taking that loan. Then I did some repairs in my house. My brother, who's a contractor, like so many Californians, suffered greatly during the economic downturn. His house foreclosed. As a contractor, he had little work. I ended up hiring him. He did the work on my house. He's better financially off. I'm better financially off for the future. So I think of those experiences, and I think, hey, maybe there's some things like that we should be looking at as we reflect in this budget. I'm proud to represent UC Berkeley. It's in my district, and we have the Haas School of Business, one of the top 10 business schools in the country. Last week, Haas professor Janet Yellen was confirmed as the 15th chair of the Federal Reserve. Professor Yellen is one of many business and economic professors across the country who have been very smart and active voices on economic policy for decades. And when I review their research and talk to some of these folks, they give a little bit different advice than some of the opinion that we're hearing most loud here in Sacramento. Put it simply, California finally has some extra funds to invest. Some of this revenue is one-time, some of it's ongoing. So how do we think about this new money if we were individuals planning for our future? Maybe the financial planner like mine would say, hey, good to pay down high-cost debts, always have an emergency fund for unexpected events, and maybe use a portion of investments or savings, your income, for things that might give an immediate higher and long-term return. So the budget before us does the first two of these strategies very well, but perhaps not the third. Research by a Nobel Prize-winning economist at University of Chicago, James Heckman, suggests that the rate of return in early childhood education, that the rate of return is between 7 to 10% a year. That's his estimate. So if we compare that to some of the proposed debt paydowns that are in this budget, one of which is the Economic Recovery Bond, the Economic Recovery Bonds right now are costing us interest payments between 3.5 and 5%. So is it prudent to forego a potential return of 7 to 10% in the immediate relief of a 3.5 to 5% cost? Another example. Over this last downturn, because of our, not only, but a lot because of our cuts to, say, the CSU system, our California State University system, in effect, rejected 20,000 students who were eligible to go to those campuses. Those students were not allowed to enroll. Now, research indicates that a college education can generate 550,000 additional lifetime earnings just by virtue of having a college education. So if we take those 20,000 folks who didn't get college educations, maybe they will in the future, but right now they don't have them, and we look at it if they were to stay in the state, and we wiped out those future earnings, we are losing $11 billion of economic activity in our state. So I hope that we use our budget review this year to make sure that we weigh options, to pay down debt, to create a healthy rainy day fund, to make prudent investments. I believe we can do all three. I look forward to starting the discussion today. And I turn to my Vice Chair, Mr. Grill, to see if he has comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, I think this is a pleasure to start with many more things that I think we agree upon and disagree. First of all, I think we all recognize we want to avoid the mistakes that have been made in the past by legislative bodies in this budget process. I think, generally speaking, there's significant overlap in that we agree that a rainy day fund is necessary to put monies away so we can avoid the fits and starts and peaks and troughs and spending and cutting binges that California frequently goes through. I think we also have a much overlap, bipartisan overlap, with the commitment to pay down debt, immediate debt, than the long-term wall of debt that exists out there. Also, undoing gimmicks that have been imposed in the past that have hurt our ability to put together a budget that is balanced and thoughtful. Also, starting the process really of recognizing and addressing long-term liabilities that have been ignored by legislatures in the past, and to avoid new taxes. And so those things, I think, many of us agree with, and there's significant overlap, and that's a good place to start. And generally speaking, I think my colleagues and I, we look forward to working with everyone on the Budget Committee and the entire legislature, the Governor's Office, and the LAO to craft a budget that we can all be proud of, that imposes fiscal discipline and will allow California to continue to come back from the economic recession that we went through for so many years. So thank you, Madam Chair, and I look forward to a productive year.
So our next task is to hear from the LAO. Excuse me, Department of Finance first. Apologies. We'll hear from LAO second. So Keely Bosler from the Department of Finance will give us an overview. Keely, if you'd like to come to the table. Mac Taylor, why don't you come up now, and that way we don't have to have delay in that. And then once they've given that overview, members, you have the opportunity to ask questions and, of course, to make any comments you choose to make.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Keely Bosler with the Department of Finance, and the sergeants are passing around an outline that I'm going to use today to talk through. And it's my pleasure to be here today to present the Governor's 2014-15 budget. As was alluded to in the Chair's opening comments, this last decade has been a tumultuous one for the state of California, especially with regards to our budget. And as the first slide in the presentation that's being distributed to you shows, shortly after Governor Brown was elected in 2011, the state was facing a $26.6 billion deficit and a $20 billion ongoing shortfall between revenues and expenditures. But through the hard work of the legislature and the governor, through many difficult spending cuts, and also the passage of Proposition 30 and the temporary taxes, the state is now on the most stable footing it has been on in a decade. But as history has shown us, especially if you look at this graph, periods of relative balance and stability can be quickly followed by a budget crisis. And so this year, the governor's budget really has a particular emphasis on maintaining the fiscal balance that we've achieved. The budget is balanced. It has a particular emphasis on paying down the state's debts. And because of Proposition 30, it makes significant investments in our education system. If you move on to the second slide, you'll see what our main concerns are about maintaining the fiscal balance, and that is that we think that the surplus that we currently have in this budget is fleeting. That's because it is mainly based on capital gains revenues, which you can see here on this chart, which are extremely volatile. Overall, the economy has been growing modestly, but capital gains and the stock market especially have been soaring. I think both the LAO and us, we both use that word when it comes to the stock market. We believe the budget is based on $4 billion in windfall taxes that we otherwise would not see in a normal year. And we think this makes the surplus only temporary if we do not continue the course that we are. Also, another thing is that the Proposition 30 taxes are temporary, and the first of those revenues to expire occur at the end of 2016, so that's just around the corner. In addition, there are many budget risks that continue for the state. We discussed capital gains being one of them, but also health care costs. Just this month, we're implementing a historic health care reform. This means expanded services to millions more Californians. Millions more Californians are covered on the health exchange. But it also means that our budgetary expenditures are much more dependent on the rate of healthcare inflation, and that continues to be a concern for us. Federal fiscal challenges also remain. However, they have become more muted in recent weeks, which is a good thing, but there continues to be a lot of pressure at the federal government and decisions that may have impacts on the state budget. Also, the ongoing disillusion of redevelopment also continues to be a risk, as recently a court decision has put about $3 billion of the $7 billion that cities, counties, special districts, and schools have received from the dissolution of redevelopment. So we continue to monitor those trial court decisions, but that is also a risk to the state's revenues. The prison population cap that the state is also being faced with by the federal courts is also a continued risk. This budget is built on the assumption that there'll be a 2-year extension granted, but that is not certain. And we may need additional revenues beyond the budget to assure that there's no early release of offenders who have committed serious and violent crimes. Also, as the chair alluded to in her opening comments, economics are cyclical in this country and in this state, and we're currently at about 4.5 years into the current expansionary period, and it would be a historical anomaly if we didn't see another slowdown in the next few years. And then finally, we do continue to have significant debts and liabilities, even with the emphasis that the governor places in this budget on paying down some of those debts. But there continues to be a significant additional debts and liabilities that the state faces. And on the next slide, you'll see the list that we have compiled of all the debts and liabilities that the state's currently facing, and they number about $343 billion. As I said in the opening, this budget does place an emphasis on paying down the wall of debt. Specifically, the state has prioritized, the governor has prioritized $11 billion to pay down debt in the budget year. Specifically, a large chunk of this money is to pay schools and actually eliminate school deferrals, which have been used extensively over the last several years to help balance the state's budget. It also fully pays off the economic recovery bonds that were issued back in 2004 to cover deficits from as far back as 2002. So this is a very big accomplishment in this budget. Also, we pay back a few loans early in the area of transportation and cap and trade, with a particular emphasis on making important investments in the maintenance of our roads and also reducing greenhouse gases. Also, in our multi-year forecast, we have a plan to completely eliminate the wall of debt, which is, again, just a subset of the liabilities over the next at the end of 2017-18, which is what this slide shows here. As I mentioned previous, Proposition 30 has given the state an enormous opportunity to reinvest in schools, and this budget provides $10 billion in new resources for schools. This is an 11.4% increase over the budget that was enacted last year. And it includes a $4.5 billion investment in the local control funding formula that was just enacted and signed last year. And this formula is going to really help us to correct historical inequities in how funds have been allocated to schools by providing a larger proportion of funding for schools that are serving a large proportion of low-income students and students who are English language learners. We also pay off the deferrals, which at their peak were $9.5 billion, and so schools are no longer faced with the complicated cash flow issues that they've been facing in the years past, and budgetary reductions. On the next slide, the governor also continues his investment in higher education with this budget. Also, the California community colleges are going to be receiving around $1 billion in new monies. We also pay off the deferrals that the community colleges have also been subject to. There's funding for enrollment growth in the community colleges, and then we also continue to make investments in promoting student success, with a particular emphasis this year on the success of underrepresented student groups being served in the community colleges. We also continue, the governor also continues the second year of a 4-year reinvestment plan for the universities, for University of California and California State University systems by providing 5% increases to both of those segments, and also holding tuition flat for California students, for all students. This year, something new is that we're requiring both the University of California and the CSU to prepare sustainability plans that really focus on reducing the time it takes students to achieve their degrees in order to keep higher education costs affordable for everyone. Also new in this budget, we've proposed a $50 million innovation grant in higher education, and the focus of this grant is really to help to encourage cross-collaboration amongst the segments in order to improve student outcomes and, again, reduce the time it takes students to attain a degree. Moving on to the next slide, the governor maintains his support for strengthening the safety net that provides critical services for low-income Californians and Californians living with disabilities. Again, just this month, healthcare reform is being implemented, and millions of millions of Californians are being offered health insurance via Covered California, the state's healthcare exchange. But also this month, millions of childless adults, parent caretaker relatives, up to 138% of federal poverty level, are also being provided benefits through the state's Medicaid program, Medi-Cal. Also last year, as part of the implementation of healthcare reform, there was the expansion of benefits provided to Medi-Cal recipients. $670 million in new general fund money is in the budget to both implement healthcare reform and fund those expanded benefits, which include expanded benefits for mental health care, substance use disorder, and also adult dental. The governor also, this past fall, signed legislation to increase the state's minimum wage by 25% over the next 2 years. The budget reflects those adjustments. In addition, the governor continues to support a 5% grant increase for CalWORKs recipients, and the budget includes $168 million from realignment monies, but for the full grant increase, but $6.3 million from the general fund to also support that. And then we have a new initiative this year, which will be a $115 million investment over the next 3 years. And this initiative is really a intensive parent-child engagement pilot to provide high-quality child care and strategies to engage parents to help move them off of the CalWORKs program. This year, on the next slide, we show that the governor has a particular emphasis on strengthening our infrastructure, and earlier this week you should have had the state's first 5-year infrastructure plan. That was the first one that's been released since 2008, so not the first one. And this year we tried to bring some new focus to the plan by really focusing on the affordability of the plan over the long term, and also on the significant deferred maintenance that the state's infrastructure currently has. The budget provides $815 million for deferred maintenance to help chip away at what we estimate is about a $65 billion backlog of deferred maintenance, the most significant part being related to our streets and roads. And again, we do also make some early repayments of the transportation loans and cap and trade loans that we discussed earlier, that also part of that reinvestment in the infrastructure. The governor's budget also includes significant investments to address climate change and water sustainability, with $850 million cap and trade investment plan. I know folks have been waiting for this plan, and it is included in the budget this year. We include $250 million for the high-speed rail program, $350 million for other sustainable communities and clean transportation projects, $140 million for energy efficiency and clean energy, and also $110 million for natural resources and waste diversion. The plan has a specific emphasis on reducing greenhouse gases in disadvantaged communities, and it also includes the $100 million repayment of the loan that was made from the Cap and Trade program to the general fund last year. Late last year, the administration, the governor, released a water action plan, and this is a multifaceted plan that provides steps that the state should take over the next 5 years to really promote sustainable water policies in our state. This is obviously really very timely given the significant drought that the state is currently facing. This plan, the budget contains monies to support this plan, $619 million, including $473 million to continue to promote regional self-reliance around the state, $77 million for flood protection, $30 million to protect and restore ecosystems, $20 million for water conservation, $11 million for safe drinking water, and $8 million to expand groundwater storage. And the last thing I'm going to wrap up with is the governor's budget also saves for a rainy day by making the first deposit into the budget stabilization account since 2007, a deposit of $1.6 billion. As I discussed earlier, we believe the state's surplus is based really on windfall capital gains revenues. And in order to counteract these volatile revenue sources, we are proposing a new constitutional amendment that would be placed before the voters in November of 2014 that would build a lasting rainy day fund for the state. And this would be done by specifically getting directly to the cause of the problem, which is the volatile revenue sources like capital gains that the state has. We also propose a mechanism to create a Proposition 98 reserve to help protect education from cuts. The school districts faced very difficult times over the last several years, and we want to be able to save a little bit of money so that we can avoid that kind of cliff effect in the next downturn. Also, we propose to double the maximum size of the rainy day fund and then also allow the payment of the state's debts and liabilities. Currently, ACA 4, which is slated for the ballot in November, does not allow this flexibility, and we think that's a key weakness of that initiative. Finally, I'll just say that we know that California has challenges ahead, but this budget is balanced. It pays down debt, and it makes a significant investment in education, and it keeps the state on its newfound stable footing so that we can take on those challenges as they arise. So I want to just thank you for your time and answer any questions.